All right. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. We are joined today by Senator McPhedran, MP Heather McPherson, MP Lindsay Mathyssen, and virtually by the Honourable Douglas Roche. And MP Elizabeth May will be possibly joining the press conference later as well. Once the opening remarks have finished, we will start with questions in the room before taking questions from the Zoom link. Nous allons commencer avec questions dans la salle, suivi par des questions sur la ligne. So, Senator McPhedran, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. We'll be very brief this morning, but the purpose of our being here today is to send a polite, urgent, and very firm request to the Government of Canada to include parliamentarians and young leaders here in this country in the first meeting of the states parties to the relatively new UN treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that is going to take place in Vienna from June 19th to the 22nd. We have heard nothing from our government about any participation of an observer delegation. There is no threat as great to the human race and to the planet as nuclear warfare. We cannot continue to ignore this as this serious threat. We have ample evidence from Putin, from North Korea, that this is real, this is imminent, and we must be taking action as a country. And I'm very honored to be joined today by colleagues from the House of Commons, Member of Parliament Heather McPherson, Member of Parliament Lindsay Mathyssen, and we may be joined by others if they're able to get away. We know that over 40 senators have signed the pledge of the Nobel laureate ICANN to work towards the abolition and the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We know that as many MPs have done the same thing, and the level of interest, the level of concern is high, is sincere. We are all prepared to participate. We need the government to make this opportunity possible. Thank you.
Should we move to
We could hear from one of Canada's former ambassadors on disarmament, also retired from the Senate of Canada, and a member of Parliament for Alberta, the Honourable Douglas Roche. We can't.
Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this meeting. And I want to give my full support to Senator McPhedran and Member of Parliament Heather McPherson in their efforts to have Canada represented at the first meeting of the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is extremely important. And, when I went into my kitchen this morning for breakfast and turned on the television, the very first headline I saw on TV this morning was, "Threat of nuclear war must not be underestimated." This was from Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia. So once more, in this terrible this terrible war that we're living through in Ukraine, when these threats and the deaths and the explosions and all the horrible things that are happening, we're being threatened again with the use of nuclear weapons. So people really need to understand that the threat of nuclear weapons use is very real. And we have been plunged into a new world of disorder in which the long taboo on the use of nuclear weapons has been lifted. And this is sowing fear throughout the world and drawing attention to the need to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons. For some 50 years, the Non-Proliferation Treaty has tried to do that. through the legal obligation for state parties to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. They have ignored that. And thus a humanitarian movement sprung up a few years ago, which resulted in negotiations at the United Nations for a new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And this treaty prohibits the possession of nuclear weapons, not just their use. And it was signed by 122 countries. It's now entered into force. It's been ratified by 60 countries. It's very much a living document on the international scene. And yet it has been resisted by the nuclear weapon states and by NATO and by extension Canada. I think at its heart, many in the Canadian government, the officials of the Canadian government, would like to have Canada participate in the treaty, but they're prohibited. They feel that they're prohibited from doing so by the strong stand taken by NATO and Washington particularly. So we have to stand up for what is right in the world, and what is right is to protect humanity. And Mr. Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, is now meeting today in Moscow to make his efforts at trying to do something to ease the strain and end this war, has said that humanity remains one misunderstanding, one misstep, one miscalculation, one pushed button away from annihilation. That is a terrifying warning given by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Canada should heed this. Canada needs to, if it's not ready to join the treaty immediately, it should attend this first meeting in June in Vienna of all the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Our fellow members in NATO, Germany and Norway, have said that they will attend. There is no excuse for Canada not attending, and that delegation should comprise both officials from the government and parliamentarians. It is extremely important that parliamentarians be present to convey into the meeting in the ways that will be possible for them on side events, to convey the feeling, their understanding of how Canada and how nuclear weapons prohibition must proceed. And it's also very important for them to come back to Canada and tell Canadians, tell their constituents, tell the Parliament, the House of Commons and the Senate, what is going on in the world. So Canada could start a process of moving toward the treaty by stepping up its work in NATO. NATO is an obstacle to the treaty because NATO has said that nuclear weapons are the supreme guarantee of security. That NATO doctrine has to be changed, and Canada must work very hard to work with NATO to change its doctrine and then join the treaty as a full member of the Prohibition Treaty.
Thank you. I'd like to just start by saying what an incredible honor it is to have the Honourable Doug Roche with us today. He is a member of Parliament in the same riding that I am now a member of Parliament in, or he was a member of Parliament in the same riding, and is an incredible mentor for all of us who are working so hard on the disarmament file. I'd also like to thank Senator McPhedran for being with us today and raising her voice within the Senate. Today, I'm joined by my colleague Lindsay Mathyssen. So you will see that there are two New Democrats on this stage, but I think it's also important to recognize that there are members of almost every party within the House of Commons that very much support the work of nuclear disarmament, very much support what we are trying to achieve. And while they were not able to be with us today, their voices have been raised. We have heard their voices, and that they will continue to push within their caucuses, as Lindsay and I will continue to push within our caucus to move towards a nuclear-free world. Because I think now more than ever, we need to recognize, if there is ever a time that the world needs to recognize the importance of nuclear weapon disarmament, of the importance of prohibiting nuclear weapons in the world, it has to be now. It has to be this moment in time where a madman is able to threaten and blackmail the entire planet with the threat of nuclear war. Think of the precedent that sets in terms of global relations. Think about the precedent that sets in terms of going forward when as a global community, we say that if you have a nuclear weapon, you can kind of do whatever you want. You can kind of get away with whatever you want. That is terrifying. That is a terrifying future that I don't want for my children, that I don't want for any of the children in Ukraine, that I don't want for anyone's children in this world. So we need to do what we can. Canada does have an important role to play, and that role needs to start by engaging in conversations, by being at the table, by being part of the discussions. The fact that the government has made no move to determine whether or not they will be sending an observation mission makes me feel like in a way that's very similar to other things we've seen from the Liberal government, that they're just going to wait for the clock to run out. They're just going to try to time this out so that they don't have to actually respond to it. And we are here, and many other parliamentarians that stand with us are here to demand that the government take the step, make the decision, ensure that Canada, the government of Canada and the parliamentarians of Canada are present in Vienna to represent at the first members meeting of the TPNW. And if we can't sign on, as Doug said, we have to go as observers. Thank you very much. And I'll just pass it for some short comments to Lindsay.
Thank you very much. I also am incredibly honored to be on this stage with such incredible parliamentarians, leaders in this country. And I think what is key here is that Canada show that leadership. We've often been very critical of the government for saying all the things that people want to hear and yet not acting on them. And this is yet another example of that incredible leadership that we need to see in the world, and to have Canada step up and do its part. It's not easy. That political will, that political courage can be difficult. And as former Senator Roche had mentioned, that there are a lot of pressures in terms of NATO, but Canada has to have that political courage. Now is absolutely the time. I couldn't put it as eloquently as Heather has, if now, not when. So thank you very much.
Thank you. As we don't have any questions in the room, we will go directly to our questions from Zoom. Alors, lorsqu'il n'y a pas de questions dans la salle, nous allons prendre des questions sur Zoom. So our first question comes from Zhao Li from City News. Oh. Okay. Yeah, unless there's anyone who has any other questions who would like to raise their hand.
I don't have a question, but I do have a message to convey. We had two youth leaders that we were trying to bring into this news conference. It would have created a span of ages speaking out on this issue, but they're writing exams, and so it was too much to ask to skip the exam and come to the media conference. But I have been asked to convey the message from the younger generation of youth leaders. There's a high degree of awareness and strong concern among young leaders in this country. And what they see with the threat of nuclear war being so real and so close for them is that they can seriously contemplate no future. And as one of them said, if we don't end nuclear weapons, they will end us as an entire civilization. And so I'm a long way from being young, but on behalf of youth leaders in this country, I want to pass this message on. This is a generation deeply concerned, highly engaged, looking to the government that promised and has promised repeatedly to respect youth and to treat youth as the leaders of today, not tomorrow. And so I'm adding their voices to our voices as parliamentarians, urging a delegation of observers at minimum, and to include parliamentarians as well as youth from Canada to be present as part of this very important first meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Thank you. Okay. Honorable Roche?
Yes, if I may say a word following what you said, Senator. Canada has a long record of involvement in nuclear disarmament issues, and one quickly recalls the efforts that Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau made in the 1980s by going around the world to the capitals of the nuclear weapon states, urging them to step down from the nuclear arms race at that time. And later on, I had occasion to work with former president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he told me that Mr. Trudeau's work had a strong influence on the Reagan-Gorbachev summits of the late 1980s, which produced the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a ban on all intermediate nuclear weapons. And so there have been many instances in which Canada has taken a lead in disarmament areas and arms control. The Landmines Treaty was originally sponsored by Canada. The International Criminal Court was fathered by Canada. There have been strong instances in which Canada has taken a leadership role. So it's not right that Canada should absent itself or dismiss the importance of this new treaty, which came in 2017 as a result of the inaction of the nuclear weapon states to fulfill their obligations to humanity. And so the modern movement is based on the humanitarian recognition of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result to the world as a result of a nuclear war, nuclear exchange. And that is precisely what we are being threatened with today. And so we have to see the signs of the times. And one of them is the arrival on the scene of the new treaty. As I've said, it's been signed by 122 states and ratified by 60. So this is not some sort of marginal thing. It's entering into the mainstream of international politics. And Canada should, at the very least, send an official observer to an observer team to this meeting. So I'm making a real effort, a plea here to the Canadian authorities to exercise their sense of responsibility to humanity that is made all the more evident and in greater need today as a result of the Ukrainian war.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate this.
Thank you. This ends our press conference.